Afternoon. Let me show you real quick here how to do a little work. This is a Hexacon P200 soldering iron. Almost all the Hexacon soldering irons, whatever the model number is what the wattage is. So if it's whatever 300, it's 300 watt. There are two basic styles. This is probably the more common style. This is the heat shield. The handles on these are wood. The cords on these are kind of a rubber material that's actually was manufactured by Welding, and so was the plug. I assume the plug and the cord came together. And I'm going to show you real quick here how to work on these. You may want to work on that tip, and you may want to take it off to do some work and get it surfaced up. You know, a lot of times these are really pitted up, or they're just so black that it's not even funny. You gotta, these big soldering irons, you really got to keep an eye on them, make sure the tips are tinned. Actually, what I do is I've got two ways I deal with those. I've got one way is inside a little work box, I've got a heavy-duty diode and a switch, and I'll draw this out later for you. All it does is switch the diode in gear in line, and it converts the AC voltage into half-wave DC, and it drops the voltage down by about half, so it derates the soldering iron. And I use that as kind of a standby. The other way I work with those is probably a little more safer. These things are real blow torches. This soldering iron is capable of 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit easily. You really need a good stand, and even that stand is probably a little small. The legs get hot on the thing. It's basically two pieces of folded metal with some heavy steel legs. A lot of times I use heavy pieces of sheet steel, and they're usually pretty big. There's a foot or two square, and sometimes I'll even double them up just so you don't even with those heavy, some of those soldering irons are almost 500 watts. I've got one soldering iron that's 700 watts, and it's pretty easy to probably start a fire with that, so you want to really keep on top of that. And I use the foot switch method on those, where I've got a foot switch. I've got a couple of them I drag around, and I usually put them in line with electrical appliances like grinders and drill presses and those type of things. And under those circumstances, what the theory is if you're standing on the thing and something goes awry, say you're using a buffer and it pulls the work away from you, or you're using a drill press and the drill grabs it and starts swinging it around, your first reaction is going to be to jump back. Well, usually when you jump back, your foot comes off the switch and it'll stop the thing relatively safely. On these, in this application, you're pretty much locked into the thing. You got to stand on the switch, and if you're not there, then the switch is off and the soldering iron is probably cooling down. A lot of people don't like that, but that's how I deal with it. I had the misfortune one time of leaving a heavy-duty soldering iron on a table on a stand, and it was an older stand, and the heat over the years had deteriorated the thing up under the legs, and I didn't know it, and basically it fell apart and fell onto the table and caused a heck of a burn on the table. And if I hadn't probably came back when I did, it probably could have caused a fire. It was pretty close to setting a fire. So I kind of changed my tactics on how I deal with big soldering irons. Another way to deal with big soldering irons is to just don't use them and use heavy-duty soldering guns. Those, you have a switch you have to hold. They don't tend to work as well on heavy-duty jobs. But anyway, enough gibby-gab about safety. What I do on these, first thing I do is usually examine the cords. This one has a small place in it. It's kind of a, I don't know if it's a cut or what it is. It's kind of a place. It could be taped. It's only probably about a foot from the end. It could be lopped off and have a new plug put on there, which probably wouldn't be a bad idea. That plug is a little dated. If you do that, if you buy a new plug, make sure you get a good one. Don't go buying one of those dollar plugs. They're just not going to handle this kind of stuff. They're not rated for that. They're rated for crummy 30-watt appliances. These are a little heavier duty, and you're gonna regret it later. Buying cheap electrical ends is just false economy. I know they're expensive. I mean, a really good one could be $10. Well, I've had some friends that have had some electrical fires because they bought crummy ends and they don't clamp down properly, and it really isn't worth burning your house down or getting a hell of a shock or melting the cord in half for a $10 plug. So buy a good one. Okay, usually what I do is, to get going here, I usually check the cords. If they're in good shape, I usually, this one's been on, so I'll need to kind of take it easy here a little bit. We'll get a rag. A lot of times when I deal with these, I go get welding gloves. I've got some heavy-duty welding gloves, because you're going to be working with these and you're going to be tempted to work with them while they're warm. These handles on these just screw off. If the point is facing you, they screw off clockwise. If you're facing away from you, it's counterclockwise. And you just keep slowly rotating it, and you'll get down to where it's hung up on the cord, and this one fell off. You just keep slowly rotating it, and the handle is actually got a metal insert. This handle is wood, so it doesn't conduct heat. This one has a little scuff mark, and as you can see in there, the cord just goes in and hooks to these two brass screws. It's easy enough to replace that cord, so there's no excuse not to have a decent cord on your soldering iron. I usually put just a tiny drop of WD-40 or some sort of lubrication back on there, and after you get your cord fixed up, the other thing you can do is you can take some sandpaper or a little WD-40 in there, won't hurt anything. And they usually clean. These, for some reason, get rust on them. It's probably from the heat and the fumes from the solder. Just go ahead and clean that up down in there. And the other thing you want to do, that baby is still warm. When you go to screw it back on, make sure it's a thread. It should just thread on. You shouldn't have to fight with it. The other thing you want to do is check the rivets in the heat shield. A lot of times they've been dropped over the years, and you may have to rebuild the heat shield. It's no big deal. What I usually do is I go get some washers. Sometimes the rivets are just busted out of there. Just go get some nice machine screws and put the washers back in. The standard is 3 discs, and you're back on the road again. You may want to use some Loctite or double nut them. If you're really a purist, you can use brass screws and you can peen them over and make them look like little brass rivets. You can do a nice job. Anyway, so you've got all that checked. You can go 2 ways here. I'll show you the way I'm going to go. Usually what I do is, once the cord's in good shape, I go ahead and plug the thing in. Lay it on your tray or on your steel. There's a number of things you could do just to keep it away. And go ahead and let it heat up and check it carefully. What I usually do is I have got one of those spot thermal heat gun or thermal thermometers, and I check the progress of the thing. If the thing is heating up good, depending on what condition the tip is in, you may be ready to go. You might be able to, with a wet rag, just wipe that off and get it re-tinned and be ready to go. More than likely that's not going to be the case. So what you're going to need is a screwdriver that fits well, the length on these and the width, and go ahead and bust that screw loose. And I usually do that when the guns are warm. What I do, if that screw is troublesome, I'll heat the gun up and then spray it real quick, and then try and loosen it both directions. Don't get too rough with it. There's no reason to get rough with it. This one's pretty loose. If that doesn't work, then heat the gun up again and spray it again, and then try, and then let it cool down and go back and forth a few times. It may take up to 5 or 6 times. It'll eventually break loose. You can prevent that in the future You can see that that's just, I don't know if you, well, maybe you can't. Yeah, on my hand there you can see it's just a rusted mess in there from the heat and corrosion from the soldering paste and stuff. And you can prevent that in the future by using a product called Never Seize. You can get that at an industrial supply place. You probably can find it on the web. You probably can get it at a car parts place. I usually buy it, if I have to buy it, I usually buy it from a bearing supply places. They usually sell bearings and industrial supplies. And that tip should just walk out. Okay. Set that off to the side. And if you've run the soldering iron, that thing will be really hot, so be careful. Otherwise you'll have a round place branded into your hand for life. Okie dokie. So you've got that loose. Now would be the time to clean that screw up and dab some Never Seize in there. Basically it's a kind of a paste with, it might have copper or some other materials in it. There are different kinds. If you go to the industrial supply place, which I'll be real honest, I highly recommend, those places deal with all sorts of industrial applications. They usually have a pretty good idea of what if you tell them what you're doing, they have a pretty good idea of what materials you need to do your job, and so you're ready to go there. One of the things you can do is you can take a little file and lightly surface it. This one has seen a lot of heavy use, and they usually get pitted up. You could use some sandpaper. You could just leave the thing alone. I usually try, at least with a wire brush, knock all that loose rust off of there. Okay. So we'll wait for this to cool down. It's getting there. The nice thing about these soldering irons is they're so big that they hold the heat for a long time. So one of the there's a little nut there, or cut of a collar, that could be taken off if you're really brave, and the heating element is actually inside. You're going to have to disassemble some stuff to get that out of there. There is really no reason, unless the element is burned out, to take that out. Usually it's so welded together from years of use, so you're not going to get it out anyway. Anyway, one of the reasons I really like these big soldering irons is there's so much mass there that if you use the foot switch method, you can take your foot off the switch and you can solder a long time before you have to apply electricity and reheat the thing. That's kind of how the old soldering coppers used to work. All these really are electrified versions. If you've ever had a blowtorch and a soldering copper, you'll know what I'm talking about. Okie dokie. Well, what we're going to do next is let's start to cool down. So one of the byproducts of working with hot things over the years is I've burned myself so many times that my hands are kind of impervious to burns now. I don't know, it's good and bad. Okie dokie. Well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to shut you off and take you over by the belt sander, and I'm going to resurface this tip. This one hasn't been resurfaced too many times. It's still pretty long. You can see right there. Okay, let me take it inside and we'll get you set up. Okay, I don't know if you can... This might be hard to see. You're probably going to see my back quite a bit, but I'll show you what's going on anyway. This is a belt sander I made years ago out of surplus steel, and it seems to work pretty good. I've been pretty happy with it. Anyway, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to resurface the tip on this. What I used to do was I used to scribe a line on the back of there, an X actually, that was parallel with that, or at least an attempt. Nowadays I've gotten where you can kind of get an idea where that tip is going to be, and you can kind of follow it. See there, I just kind of took a little pass at it and leveled most of it out. This grit is probably originally it was 80 grit. I don't suggest using 80 grit on something like this, but this belt is so worn out, it's probably more like. Anyway, you just keep going across there until you get satisfied. When you push it up against there, if you lightly hold it, and use your finger to push it up against there, it'll tilt and get that angle set for you. Yeah, it's not too bad a shape. One of the great things, if you don't have one of these, this is a belt cleaner. It's basically a big piece of rubber, and it kind of knocks the crud off there. Anyway, you go to the next side. You can see it's cleaning up pretty good. That belt's about had it. It's kind of nice to keep the old belts around. They've got, you know, no real cutting power, but when you do want to do something light, you don't have to change them so much. And one of the other things I do is I'll buy wider belts and cut them down. I run them in the belt sander, and I take an old carpet knife and carefully hold it. You may want to make sure you've got a face mask on when you do this. You probably shouldn't do this at home, but I'm going to tell you how to do it anyway. I'll get it on there and get it running, and then I push the blade into it real carefully, and it'll score the thing. And if you do it lightly, you can take the belt off and you can snap it, and then you've got two belts. Here's another one. This one is actually probably the same belt. It just got cut into two. If you push too hard, it'll cut through it, and it'll fly off, and you may hurt yourself. So if you're going to do that, think about it real carefully, and be careful when you do it. Thinking about that belt there. I don't know what grit that is. Down to about 500 grit probably now. It's really worn out. Kind of nice for polish and stuff. Anyway, that's kind of how you do that. Of course, as you sand that off, the friction causes heat. It's not perfect, but if you're really interested in getting it perfect, take and scribe a line around there, and you can get that. That one's off center a little bit, but nobody's going to cry their eyes out. I'm certainly not going to cry my eyes out. Okay, well, let me take you back outside. Now you've seen my t-shirt enough here. Okay, we're back outside here. So, you got your new tip. Now, resist the urge to... These go in pretty far. About that far. What is that, 3 inches? About. They go in pretty far. Resist the urge to let them hang out. I know it would be nice, but there's a reason. If you don't put that in there, it won't transfer heat as quickly to the tip, and it'll leave a hot spot, and you'll burn the gun down. You would go ahead and put your Never Seas in there, and you'd go ahead, and what I do is, unless you clean this whole thing up, there's usually a set screw mark there. I usually try and line that up and put it back where it was. The other way you can do that is you can do a really good job by peeking through the hole and then putting the set screw in as you hold the thing, and it'll usually just line right back up and lock the thing back into place. There's no reason to have a bunch of set screw marks all over the thing and have it look like hell. It's just no excuse. Okay, so I don't know if you can see that there. So 100 degrees. Yeah, 106. Okay. Well, let's see here. I'm gonna let you just. You know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna plug this in. Okay. And I'm gonna run and get some solder, and I'm gonna let you sit there. Okay, I'm back. It didn't take too long. Let's see here. Well, I've reached 200 degrees. A couple minutes. I'm one of the people that probably still uses lead-based solder. You can get a hold of it pretty easy, even though the world thinks it's dangerous. It's not. Sorry guys, I disagree with that. If you're really concerned about it, you can wear gloves, just don't grind it or breathe the fumes, and wash your hands after you're done. And don't eat anything while you're working with it. All common sense stuff. But since I should get out of soapbox because I'm going to preach about this. So let's see, you had to endure me being gone for a few minutes. You had to endure the soldering iron warming up. And you had to endure me now complaining or whining or preaching. You have your choice. I have a issue with whoever or whatever, the universe in general, where instead of smartening people up, we go out of our way to coddle them or protect them from themselves, and you know, you can only do so much. It's kind of reached a chronic, ridiculous level now. I believe that's called the nanny state. I don't know if you can see that or not. Yeah, there's a little smoke coming off there. It's probably the WD-40 starting to burn off. We reached almost 350 degrees. If you don't have one of these little heat thermometers or infrared thermometers, they're really nice. They read in centigrade or Fahrenheit. You just pull the trigger. Some of them have a little lamp. This one actually has a laser built in there. It's kind of hard to see in the sun. See, wherever you point is what you're supposedly measuring. I don't know about that, but it's pretty nice. We're reaching 400 degrees here real quick. Anyway, I have an issue where we go out of our way to protect people instead of educate them and smarten them up. You know, I don't know about the rest of you, but everything I ever really learned, I kind of learned the hard way. My one a perfect example. This is a bad example. It's not a happy story, but it is an example. I won my one grandson when he was pretty young. they just couldn't break him of reaching up and grabbing things off the counter. And eventually he pulled something hot off the stove and pulled it onto himself. He didn't get horribly burned. He got, I believe, maybe a first, maybe a bit of a second degree burn. I don't think there was a lot. I think it was like hot macaroni and cheese. It's not funny, but it kind of is an ironic way. Here you can see the tip is starting to oxidize a little bit. And I'm going to start trying to air it. Anyway, you just start rubbing your solder on there. This solder has flux in it. Make especially sure that you get out toward the tip where there's not as much mass there, and that will burn off quicker if you don't get some tinning on there. And a little bit there. Okay. Let's see, so how hot did that actually get? 500 degrees. And I usually use a wet rag to kind of clean the tip up. And you'll get a little splash here and there. Make sure you get these little flakes of solder that fly around. What I usually do is tin those tips and go back and check them a little bit. And touch them up, make sure it's got a good coating on it. And I usually let them sit. Don't get me wrong, I do use solder that has no lead in it from time to time. It's a little harder to work with, but it is workable. Anyway, back to my grandson. He pulled the pot of hot mac and cheese onto himself, and I know that they had tried a number of times to get him to quit pulling stuff onto him down off the thing. He would go find something to stand on. I'm not sure what the deal was. I even caught him doing it around here, and I, really sat down and had a really serious talk with him, and it just wasn't going to sink in. Anyway, after he got hurt, he learned that stuff wasn't to be touched. You got to be careful. And he really knows what the word hot means. Of course, he's older now, but unfortunately, he learned it the hard way. I don't wish any ill will on anybody getting hurt that way. At least he didn't get horribly hurt. I believe one of the parents was pretty close. I think one of them turned around, it takes a second, turned around, he dumped the stuff on himself, screamed bloody murder. I think they threw a bunch of water on him from the sink. If I remember hearing the story right, took him to the hospital. Of course, then you get the eye from the hospital because your kid had an accident. Anyway, he really knows what hot means. When he comes up here and works, I like him to learn about these different things, or at least be exposed to them. If we're working with something like this, all I got to do is tell him one time, that's hot, just be careful. And the good thing is he's not afraid of things that are hot. He just understands that they're to be respected. And that's good. So we've wandered away from me showing you how to get your Hexacon soldering iron going here to a preachy lecture about child safety and how the nanny state's taken over the world. Well, I don't know. That's fine. Anyway, this procedure would apply to other Hexacon products. This would probably also apply to like the American Beauty soldering irons. They're built very similar. General Electric made some soldering irons that were pretty similar. Some of these soldering irons have permanent tips, and there's a place about in here that is screwed on. There's kind of a stud. And to be real honest, I can't think of the brand name of one of those right off the bat. Anyway, those are some quick tips on how to work with those soldering irons. Those are really good property to have. I don't know, it allows you a little more control than the torch. You don't have to worry about it burning the house down too much. Anyway, I suppose I've whined and complained enough today. I've gotten kind of whiny and complaining lately. Maybe I need to be more serious. Okay. Anyway, if you have a comment or question, feel free to leave them. If you want to see me do something about one of the American Beauty soldering irons, I've got a number of those. I've got a number of them rolled up in a box that need to be cleaned up and taken care of. I can certainly go through one of those for you. All those products are really great products. They've stood the test of time. I believe, I know for a fact that they were selling these in 1952. So let's, so that soldering iron is about 60 years old, and it still works just fine. If you happen to stumble onto one of those at a sale or flea market or antique store or something, it's not horribly overpriced. You might want to think about picking it up. They're a good product. I believe Hexacon is still in business, and they believe they still make a similar product. I don't think there's a lot changed in soldering iron technology. If you're one of the folks that does leaded glass, you probably are well aware that you have a need for a heavy-duty soldering iron. A soldering gun isn't going to cut it, and a torch isn't probably too appropriate. And I guarantee you something like that would beat the stuffings out of any offshore junk that you're going to get at the hobby place. Do yourself a favor and just don't buy something like that. It's not repairable, it's not replaceable, and they're kind of dangerous. I had a friend had one of those kind of catch on fire. He was very disappointed in the product. I was disappointed that he even bought something like it, especially when I've got plenty of them he can borrow or have. Okie dokie, that's enough. If you'd like to subscribe to my channel, that'd be great. If you want to hear me whine more about things, that's fine too. I've got plenty of things to whine about, as do most people. Okie dokie. Anyway, have a really great day. Have a safe day. Take her easy.